Hi everyone, this is Tech Support by Artie, and in this video I'm going to walk you through the basic setup of your TP-Link Wi-Fi router. This is for those of you who are setting up your router for the first time, or for those of you who want to run quick setup again. Now, the guide that I'll be showing you will be done in a wide variety of router models today. So I will be showing you different generations of TP-Link's router interface. So this one is the latest interface that they have for their newer routers. This one over here is for their slightly older routers, probably their wireless AC routers. These are for lower model routers from TP-Link. And this interface is for those of you with really old TP-Link routers before they even changed their logo. And I also even have a little bit of a bonus video at the end. For those of you who own TP-Link's most expensive routers, we're going to walk you through the steps as well. I'm going to go back to this model here because the steps that we're going to be doing here should be similar across different models of TP-Link routers. Okay, so I presume that you've already followed the initial setup as indicated in the included user guide or quick install guide or quick setup guide included with your router. That is, you have power connected to your router, you have your wires or cables connected properly, and everything's turned on. And another assumption is you have to be connected to your router's network, either via Wi-Fi by using the username and password in a sticker on the bottom of the router, or via Ethernet by connecting a cable from one of the LAN ports on the back of your router to your computer or laptop or whatever device you're using. Now, while you can use your phone's web browser to follow along, you can also use your computer as the one that we're using right now. Now, since these are emulators, you're going to be seeing the URL that I have in my address bar is a little different from what you would see on your router. But if you want to access the initial setup page for your router, you will either have to go to tplinkwifi.net. So you type that in your address bar and you should be brought to the login page for your particular router. In this case, this is the page for the router that we have. Or you can also use 192.168.0.1. I believe the newer routers from TP-Link have this in a sticker on the bottom of the device, so you won't forget. Now, this is what the real web page would look like. But for the moment, we're just going to settle with an emulator because I would like to show you different models and how it might differ from one to the next. So with our prerequisites out of the way, let's get into the initial setup. So the first thing you need to do is to set up a password. Now, this procedure is different depending on which router model you have. However, you will be usually asked to set a password yourself before you can log into the router interface. I believe the older TP-Link router models, they have a default username password combination that you need to enter first before you can access quick setup. For specific instructions, refer to the manual included with your router. This is usually the case for the older routers, but for the newer ones, they will ask you to set a password first before you can do anything else. So once you've done that, and once you're signed in, you should arrive to a screen that looks similar to this for those of you with the latest models, this for those of you with slightly older models, this for those of you with lower end models, or even this for those of you with even older routers from TP-Link. So the screens look a little different from model to model, but the gist of it is the same. So let's begin. The first thing that we need to do in the first screen is to select our time zone. Pick the time zone that corresponds to a city that's closest to you, or a UTC offset that's the same as the area you're in. We're currently in Manila, and the closest to us, Hong Kong or Singapore. We'll choose Singapore. Because that's UTC +8. That's similar to the time zone that we have. Click Next, and you will be brought to the next screen. So the next screen is where you will pick the connection type that you have. If you are unsure about this, you can use the Auto Detect button, and the router will try to select one of these choices automatically. However, here's a hint. If If your router is able to get internet access, and you can tell this by looking at the internet light indicator on your router, and if that light is colored green, that means you already have an internet connection and you don't need to use other settings. Now, the default here is dynamic IP. In the case of the simulator, they use the other option here. 99% of the time, if you are not sure as to which settings to use, select dynamic IP. This will let your router negotiate with your modem about getting an IP address so that it will be able to connect to the internet. If your ISP gives you specific information about authenticating to the network, such as an IP address, a subnet mask, gateway, DNS address IPs, you are on a static IP connection, and you can select the second option here. If you are given in a username and a password, most probably you're on PPPoE. If you are given other connectivity information like VPN credentials, or if you're instructed by your ISP, L2TP and PPTP are VPN connection techniques for some ISPs. DS Lite and V6 Plus are specific services for some ISPs in some other areas. If you are unsure as to which option to select, try dynamic IP first. If that doesn't work, call your ISP if you need to set up your router with specific settings. We'll just go with dynamic IP for now. And the next step is to determine which, if we are going to use the router's own MAC address, or if we're going to clone the current device MAC address, or if we're going to use a custom one of our own. Now, what does this mean? Now, basically, if you are on a dynamic IP connection or any other kind of connection, by default, your router is going to use its own address to advertise its presence to your modem. Now, typically, you don't have to change this. You can just get away with using the default address and you should be able to connect. However, if you are unable to connect for some reason, your modem from your ISP might expect that a specific device may only be connected to it, like, for example, a specific computer or the MAC address of some other equipment. So in this case, you can either choose to clone the MAC address, to let your router clone the MAC address of the device that you're using right now. So what it will do is that it will take the MAC address of your computer or phone, and it's going to use that when talking to your ISP's modem. And hopefully that will let the modem know that it's as if that the router is not actually a router, but it's your computer or some authorized device. But if you have a specific MAC address that you should use, you have the option to type your own, like so. But if you don't know what this option is, you can leave it at the default. Now, there's a drop-down here for special ISP settings, and this is typically for those of you which use VLAN or IPTV services. If you don't know what this is, you can just leave this setting at none. But if you have a specific setup, or like a specific ISP with their own configuration that makes your connection work with their setup, you pick your ISP from the list here, or you can enter the settings manually in the boxes provided to you. Now, if you don't know what this section is for, or if you do not know what this does, just leave this option at none, because if you mess with this, you might have issues connecting to your network. However, if your ISP has special instructions that you need to select your telco here, or if they give you VLAN or IPTV settings, you can make those changes here. Click Next, and you will be brought to the next page. So this is where you will set the network name, and your password of your Wi-Fi network. Now, a PSA, please change this immediately. So change the network name to something unique, like, I don't know, Tech Support by RD, which is this channel's name, or change the password to a secure password with at least 12 characters. Now, if this were a real router, the default password will be an 8-digit number, so it will be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. However, this will be a random number for real TP-Link routers. The point is, you have to change this password to something a little more secure. So something like password 123 will work. Now, since this is a newer router, this router has a feature called Smart Connect. Let me explain what that is. If you have Smart Connect, this means that you have a router with multiple bands. And what Smart Connect allows you to do is to have the router automatically steer devices that connect to it to the most appropriate band available. So, for example, if your device supports the either band, in the case of a dual band router like the one we have here, it will automatically steer the router to either the 2.4 or the 5 gigahertz bands, for example, the most appropriate band that's available. However, if you have some older device or a lower end device that doesn't support 5 gigahertz, for example, it will still connect to the 2.4 gigahertz band. So as you can see, if I disable Smart Connect as I just did, we get separate items for 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the gist of this is 2.4 gigahertz has longer range and is compatible with almost every single device that supports Wi-Fi, whereas 5 gigahertz has a larger bandwidth available to you, is less susceptible from interference from other Wi-Fi access points. But the disadvantage is it's not it's not resistant to obstacles in the way. So if you have even a single concrete wall between the router and your device, your signal could get weakened. And that's why 2.4 gigahertz can go through walls a little better than 5 gigahertz does. And despite 2.4 gigahertz being a little slower and more susceptible to interference from other Wi-Fi networks, like those from your neighbor or the pocket Wi-Fi devices or even your mobile hotspot, and even other protocols that use the same frequency spectrum, like Bluetooth, which uses 2.4 gigahertz. And yes, some microwave ovens, they have frequencies close to 2.4 gigahertz. So 2.4 gigahertz, longer range. 5 gigahertz, less susceptible to interference, but the range is a little shorter and is considerably compromised when covered by walls. So back to Smart Connect. If you have this enabled, your router will automatically show one network name for both of the bands, and it's up to your router and your device to negotiate together on determining which band is the most appropriate. So the algorithm could be a little different, but the gist is your router will try to, if your device supports 5 gigahertz and your router decides that it's good enough for your device to connect in the 5 gigahertz band, you will be connected in 5 gigahertz. However, if you're farther away from your router, it might be connected in 2.4. And this will happen automatically. You don't have to worry about it. If you disable this, you will get separate network names for the 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz bands of your router. And you will be able to see on your device 2 SSIDs from the same router, and you will be able to decide which one you'll connect to, whether you want to connect to the 2.4 gigahertz or the 5 gigahertz network on your own. Note that this is a little more unwieldy to set up because you'll have to maintain 2 SSIDs. And by default, TP-Link routers will append _5G to the 5 gigahertz network and will take the SSID and password that you have here. If you prefer the 5 gigahertz network to have its own SSID and password, you can check this checkbox and you can edit this to some other network name, network 2, and then you can set up different password here. However, if for the interest of avoiding headaches later on, you can just, I recommend that you leave the passwords the same between 2.4 and 5 gigahertz so that you don't have to remember 2 passwords at once. Now, here's a little question. You might be thinking, Smart Connect is simply going to name both networks with the same name, right? So there's nothing stopping me from copying this and pasting this name here. And this is what Smart Connect does, right? Well, the difference is, and while you can set up your router with the same network name for 2.4 and 5 gigahertz with Smart Connect disabled, only your device will be able to negotiate or figure out on its own which to connect to. The router will not have a say. It will not try to step in and steer your device to the other frequency if you have Smart Connect disabled. In this case, if you have the same network name, same password for both of the bands with Smart Connect disabled, the device that you're using will be the one to find out which of these is going to be connected. And the slight disadvantage here is, for example, if your device is initially connected to 5 gigahertz, and if you get farther away, go to another room where the 5 gigahertz signal is weak, your connection might actually drop for a moment, and your device will scan for networks again and to connect to the 2.4 gigahertz band. However, with Smart Connect enabled, it's almost the same setup, except that the moment that you go out of range of 5 gigahertz, your device will seamlessly roam automatically to 2.4 gigahertz, assuming both your router and your device agree on each other. Now, the implementation details are a little vague. I'm not really sure how they do it exactly. So the best solution is leave it enabled for the moment. And if you're experiencing issue with getting your devices connected, you can disable it. So let's click next. And once that's done, your router will test its connection to the internet. And once you're successful, and once that's complete, you will be able to share your Wi-Fi network details. So while we're waiting for that, let's go to how that might look like. A brief recap with another model. This model is the AX11000. We had an AX1800 router, and this is what you would see if you have a gaming router from TP-Link. They're a more expensive router. However, the setup procedure is similar. Select your time zone from the drop-down, and then you select your network connection type. You can use auto detect. If you can leave the default MAC address if you don't know. Special ISP settings, leave this in none if you don't know what they're for, or you specify a preset if you have special needs. And then give your network a name. Now, this is a slightly different scenario that we have here. If you have a gaming router from TP-Link, it will have not one, but two 5 gigahertz bands. So this is a tri-band router. It says here tri-band gaming router. Now, by default, network name and password will be copied over to the other two bands. So let's type tech support by RD here and password 123 as an example. Now, by default, your router is going to give underscore 5G to the first 5 gigahertz radio and underscore 5G underscore gaming for the second 5 gigahertz radio. Now, the beauty of this is since the 5 gigahertz 1 and 5 gigahertz 2 are completely different radios, you won't lose bandwidth. You can have some of your home devices connected to this first network, and you can have like your gaming PC only connected to a dedicated 5 gigahertz gaming network. So you will not be able to lose bandwidth. However, this particular router model doesn't have Smart Connect. So you can sort of simulate Smart Connect by choosing to set each band separately and copy pasting the SSID to all three bands. However, in this scenario, as I've mentioned earlier in the earlier model, your device will be the one to figure out which one is the most appropriate to connect to. If you have a gaming router, I recommend that you have each band separate in a separate SSID. And this is another scenario where you might want to disable Smart Connect on a router that has it if you want to have more control over which bands are being used by your router. For example, you can have your computers only connected to 5 gigahertz, and you can have your phones connected to the 2.4 gigahertz network, or other devices like your Internet of Things devices, TV boxes, and TV set-top boxes, or other, non-bandwidth intensive devices can connect to 2.4 gigahertz. And your gaming SSID can be reserved for something like your gaming rig. Same procedure, it will test your internet connection the same way. And once it's done, depending on which router you have, you will be asked to upgrade the firmware to the latest version. You'll be able to see details. It's a simulator because we're using a simulator, but if this were a real device, you will get a list of the changes. You can choose upgrade if you want, or skip. By the way, if you upgrade, your router will restart, and devices connected to it will temporarily get disconnected. Note, while an upgrade is in progress, do not turn off your router until it's complete. For now, let's skip here. And once you're successful, you get a screen that looks similar to this with your summary of the settings you made. And by the way, if you're setting this router up wirelessly, of course, especially if you're using the default and you change the SSID, before you click next, as instructed, reconnect to the new network. So with your SSID and your choice of password, and once you're already connected, you can click next. and you will be brought to the dashboard of your router. Let's go back to the other model. It's done. So this particular router has a feature, unlike the other router, where instead of updating manually, it will automatically update for us. So this is the auto update feature, and you can pick a time with a 2-hour block of time when the router will perform the update procedure. You can hit next, and you should get to a similar screen just like the one we have, this one. And same deal, connect to the network name and a password, especially if you're configuring your router via Wi-Fi before clicking next. And once you're done, you will be brought to this screen where you can sign in with your TP-Link ID if you have one. TP-Link ID allows you to use the Tether app to manage your router from any location, even if you're not connected to the router itself, as long as you have an internet connection. But if you don't want to use the service, you can skip and go to the main screen. Now, if your router supports the auto update feature, as in the case with the router that we have here, do not try to unplug your router between the time that you've set. Otherwise, if the update fails, you won't be able to use your router. So yeah, this is the network map. The first thing you'll see when you sign in to the the web page of your router the next time, and it looks a little different depending on which model you have. So this is what it will typically look like for most TP-Link routers, the newer ones. And if you have a high-end router, it will look like this, and you'll have even more features available to you here. Okay, so that's how to do initial setup on a TP-Link Wi-Fi router. And if you have a newer model, and once you you can stop watching, thanks for watching. But if you have an older model, this, or this, continue watching, because we'll walk through the same steps again. But I'm not going to go through each procedure in detail. I'm just going to give you the highlights. But I'm going to do it 3 more times with other router generations. There will be slight differences depending on the model again, but the steps should be similar to what we did earlier with these 2 routers that we have here. So this is the older interface, for common with TP-Link's wireless AC routers from around 2018-ish, 2017-ish. They have an interface that looks like this. Same deal. We pick a time zone. In this case, each hour has a single entry, so we pick the one that's closest to our location. Then we select the same connection type. Now, unlike other unlike other router types where you have additional ISP settings for your VLAN and others done on the next screen, it's done on this second screen immediately. So this is where you'll find your ISP profile settings or IPTV or VLAN settings. Once again, if you don't know what this setting is for, leave it at none. And once again, if you don't know which cable connection is, which kind of protocol to select, you can use dynamic IP or auto detect. Click next, and this is the part where you want to clone or not clone your MAC address. If you select the first option, it's similar to choosing use the device MAC address in the earlier router setup that we did. So if you don't know what this is for, you can just choose do not clone MAC address and hit next. Okay, this particular router has Smart Connect just like the other router that we have, and it's the same deal. So let's type tech support by RD and password 123. And if you disable this, it's supposed to copy over the settings to here, but it didn't because it's a simulator. So you can just type in here, copy your settings here if you like, or you could leave this in the same name and leave it up to your devices to connect. It's up to you which of these 2 you would like. However, my recommendation is if your router has Smart Connect, enable it, and you don't have to worry about your devices figuring out which band to connect to. However, if you don't have this option, I recommend that you give these 2 a distinct name. You can just leave _5G and the network name here. So that way, you will be able to see on your devices the most appropriate band. Or you could just leave it in the same name. And you will get a similar feature to Smart Connect, except that your devices will be the one to figure out which network to connect to. For now, let's enable it. Okay, we get a review, a summary of our settings before we hit save. It's unlike the other routers where we get this after setup. So you will see a progress bar as it tests our connection. There's supposed to be a number here if this were a real router. However, this is just a simulator. So while we're waiting for that, let's go to the even older models. Okay, I think it's done before we jump too far there. Once it's successful, you will get a chance to sign in with your TP-Link ID. You should see a login prompt in the middle here. It's not loading for some reason. And I forgot to mention this. If you have the later version of firmware installed on your router, you will be able to see a special nifty feature where you can see the QR code and the SSID and password. You can save a picture, and once you've downloaded that QR code to your computer device, you will save it to your gallery. You'll have a quick reference and a reminder about your network's SSID and password. And also you get a nifty QR code that you can scan with the camera app on your phone and automatically connect to Wi-Fi without having to enter the password. So that's something convenient. Now, this is supposed to give me an option to sign in or skip, but since this is just a simulator, it doesn't show up. But it should be similar to the two routers we've seen. So let's go to the older model for real this time. This is the interface for a TLWR940N. This is an older router. This is a lower-end model router from TP-Link. It is a single-band router. However, it has a similar quick setup guide procedure. So once you arrive at the screen, hit Next, and you will be asked to pick an operation mode. Now, let me explain these three options for you. Standard wireless router is what you will typically use if you're using this router to provide an internet connection to multiple devices at home. So 99% of the time, you'll pick this option. Access point is for those of you who want to use this router to provide a wireless network to an existing network setup that you have. So this is for advanced users who would like to provide a new Wi-Fi access point. This assumes that you have an existing network available on that you already have. However, if you don't know what this is for, just pick standard wireless router here. Range extender is a cool feature, and what this allows you to do is it will extend the range of the existing wireless network so that the network will be able to reach a farther area. So that's what the third option is for. It will essentially bounce an existing Wi-Fi wireless signal and beam that signal to by itself, so you will be able to have a farther reach for your network area. And so, which of these should I choose? Well, if you're setting up the routers to provide internet access to multiple devices, like what we've been doing with the past three models, pick this option. Click Next, and you will be asked, just like before, to pick what kind of connection you have. You can use auto detect. It's not a button, but it's an option. You can hit Next, and the router will pick one automatically. But if you do not know which option to choose, simply select Dynamic IP. Click Next, and same prompt as the earlier router. If you need to clone a MAC address, you can choose No. Or if you need to clone the MAC address to use the one that you're using, the computer you're using, you can choose Yes here. However, if you don't know what this is for, just choose No. Click Next. And here's the part where we provide the network name. So here, you can type your desired network name here, Tech Support by RD. And here in wireless security, you can choose a network with no password. You can leave the password at default, or it's recommended that you choose this second option, which is this is the security protocol. You can enter a password here, password 123. This is where you would enter here. And hit Next. And once you see this congratulations screen, hit Finish, and the router will show a progress bar, supposedly. However, since this is a simulator, we get immediately thrown to the status page right here. So this is the first screen you would see if you were to log on to the router's interface next time. Okay, and that's it for the older model router. And I'll even show you one more variety of a TP-Link router. If you have an even older model of a TP-Link router, before they even change their logo, your screen should look similar to this. Now, you might think, now, this is a little different, but in reality, this is just the same as this other interface, except that it's with the old TP-Link logo and design. It's almost a similar procedure. Let's walk you through it. Hit next, and it's going to ask you which connection type. Choose dynamic IP if you don't know, or you can use auto detect. If your ISP gives you a static IP details, you can choose static IP. If you have a username and password, PPPoE. However, 99% of the time, if you don't know what these two options are for, choose dynamic IP. Hit next. And the screen here is a little confusing, but let me explain. So the first field is if you want the wireless radio or the Wi-Fi feature of your router to be enabled. Set this to enabled because we want to connect to it, obviously. SSID is going to be the network's name. So this is where you will type tech support by RD. Next is region. You have to pick wherever you will be using the router. This way, the router will be able to show which bands or channels are available to you. So in this case, choose the area that's your country from this list. So in this case, we're in the Philippines, so we'll pick that. Channel, I recommend that you leave this in automatic. Mode, I recommend that you leave this in 11BGN mixed. It's the highest supported mode available for your router. Channel width, again, I recommend you leave this in auto. And max TX rate, I recommend that you leave this in the highest possible value. Now, you might be thinking, why are these options even exposed to us? Well, the reason is for older TP-Link routers, they are designed during times when Wi-Fi isn't that much commonplace, rather. So they give you these settings in order to be able to make your router more compatible with these range of older devices, especially with the mode you select here and the max rate. So this is for compatibility, ensuring compatibility with other devices. For wireless security, I don't recommend these two options, disable security and no change. You'll have to select the second option and enter your password here. Click next, and once you're done, hit finish, and you should see a progress bar just like before, if this were a real router, and you will be thrown to the status page once you're done. As you can see, the status page here is similar to the status page in newer models, and the status page here has been consolidated to the basic screen. Let me switch to that screen here. This is the basic screen for newer models, which replaces the status screen on older routers. And the network map replaces the basic screen. The network map, internet, wireless tabs here, they replace the basic screen here. And the, network map replaces status, rather, for the older models. And it should be similar if you have a very top-of-the-line router, like the one here. So yeah, that is how to perform the initial setup on your TP-Link router. And we've covered all of the possible iterations of their menu, whether you have the latest interface, looks like this, the high-end interface if you have a more expensive router from TP-Link, which looks like this, the slightly older interface for those of you with wireless AC routers, which looks like this, the old style interface that has the new logo, which looks like this, and the older style interface with the old TP-Link logo, which looks like this. So yeah, that's a very comprehensive list of tutorials that we have here. I hope this video is helpful. Thanks for watching, and let me end recording here.